Hi, this is a lecture number 19, Why Was England the First Country to Industrialize? We're going to start with the agricultural revolution. We'll talk about how the open field system, the Columbian Exchange and enclosure led to the agricultural revolution. The three factors of production, land, labor, capital, which will appear on your quiz, and textile, spinning, weaving factories, and the importance of coal. First of all, the Industrial Revolution, as you read in your textbook, is the increased production of machine-made goods. And the whole reason we're able to have an Industrial Revolution is because we have an Agricultural Revolution. The Agricultural Revolution begins with the open field system. What you have to understand is back then, people in England used to live like this. Here's the church, here's a bunch of little small homes, here's the barn that everybody shared, and here's the manor of the Lord, and that's where the wealthy guy lived. And everybody had three fields. You had field 1, field 2, and field 3. Everybody would help farm field 1, everybody would help farm field 2, and every year you'd leave one of the fields open with a fallow land, and the animals would graze on it. And the reason they would graze on it is to leave it fallow so the soil could rest. And this shared common land where everybody kept their pig or their cow or their lamb, the animals would fertilize it with their feces or their poop. Now, this type of farming just produced just enough food for everybody to live, maybe a little bit more for this guy over here to live too. So the agricultural revolution is they figure out a way to make all the fields, including the fallow land. They actually eliminate the fallow land. There is no more fallow land. And everywhere we go today, land doesn't need to rest because we figured out how to fertilize it. Basically, we put nitrogen back in the soil. So something that helps this is the global transfer of goods, plants, and animals, the Columbian Exchange. From Europe, Africa, and Asia to the Americas, we send onions, olives, turnips, grapes, bananas. But we bring back some really, really important plants from the Americas back to Europe, namely potatoes and corn and tomatoes. And this plant over here, the beans, the green beans right here, right here. Now, what these plants can do, and especially this missing from this picture, but the turnip puts nitrogen back in the soil. And corn and potatoes from the Americas do really well growing here in Europe, and they're very nutritious. And you can save them for a long time, and people start to really grow these a lot in Europe, and they start to eat them more and more. In fact, the potato is the most commonly consumed vegetable in the world. So, add to the Columbian Exchange, add to the agricultural revolution, wealthy farmers begin to buy up all the land. Now, it used to be the villages used to share the land. So what they do, and here's a picture of some guy who's enclosing the land. They enclose the land into big fields, these huge fields. There's no more three-field system. It was one huge field. And you would rotate the crops that were grown on there. One year you'd grow corn. One year you'd grow potatoes. The next year you would grow turnips. The fourth year you would grow beans. And every year you're rotating all these crops. And because they figure out how to put nitrogen back in the soil, you're increasing the food supply using this crop rotation in these huge fields. And you're actually producing way more food with fewer farmers. And that's a big deal because now nobody ever has to starve. So, that leads us to the three factors of production. And here are the three factors of production you have to know: land, labor, and capital. That's how I'm going to quiz you on the exam. England's land is politically stable. England has all three factors of production. That's why they're able to industrialize. There's been no damage from the wars. The Battle of Trafalgar had protected England, so nobody could ever invade England. And on this land that's politically stable, they have great resources that allow you to industrialize. They have iron ore, they have coal, and they have fast-moving rivers. The fast-moving rivers are powering the mill, and they're also transporting the goods. Coal is also powering the steam engines. And you have these incredibly fertile farms because of enclosure, because of crop rotation, because of the Columbian Exchange. And here's a picture of those very, very fertile farms. Labor. Due to the agricultural revolution, there's a population explosion, and you need fewer farmers. Families are looking for work. The Industrial Revolution begins around 1800, and it's continuing on to this day. But between 1800 and 1850, you can see that the population of England and Wales nearly doubles. So you have this huge amount of population, and they're all looking for work. That's what labor means. And you can pay these people very little money because they can't work as farmers anymore. So, and food is cheap. So you need to pay them a lot for them to live. So you have a very cheap labor source. Finally, capital. England had a very sophisticated banking system. This woman right here, Queen Victoria, she was the Queen of England at the time, and it was encouraged at this point. The English had a lot of capital because they were very wealthy because of the slave trade in the 18th century. And their successes in the Napoleonic Wars gave them a very positive attitude. So these investors in England said, look, we're English, everything is great for us, we have all this money in the bank, and the banks are willing to loan us the money. Let us go ahead and invest it into these new things called factories. So, the way you used to make textiles is by spinning and weaving. You would take the cotton or you would take the wool and you would spin it, and then you would spin it into thread, and then a weaver would weave it all together. Now, it used to be there was an imbalance. It took a long time for you to spin the cotton or the wool into thread. And these old women, their job all day long was to make this into thread. They were called spinsters because that's all they did. Very labor intensive. This guy right here, this right here is a spinning jenny. And you can see all these little bobbins up here and these kids right here, and they're working hard and they're trying to get all of this thread onto the bobbins so that a weaver can then weave that into cloth. And it is actually the first thing that industrializes is the textile industry. Textiles means clothes. Now, as you have these bigger and bigger machines, you need to have these bigger and bigger machines in big buildings. And we call these big buildings called factories. Now, these factories were originally built near fast-moving streams. But when they perfect the steam engine, you no longer need to have the stream running the water wheel. You can build a steam engine, and the steam engine's piston can drive. And this steam engine right here, this is actually driving the spinning jenny. You can see these kids are working at the spinning jenny. He's barefoot. You can tell how poor he is. And you want to hire kids because they're cheaper. And they begin to use these steam engines for more than just textiles. They use them in railroads and steamships. And this kind of spreads across England, and they start to make a lot of money. Now, more than anything, to run these new steam engines, you need coal. And coal was in the ground, and you have to dig a mine, and somebody would go all the way down there. They were called a getter, and they would pick the coal out of the mine, and then they would put it right here in these carts, and a hurrier would actually drag the cart through the ground. Excuse me. And there's this woman right here, and she's a woman, and women and children were used as hurriers because they weren't strong enough to do the getting. And right here, and this is going to be part of your job, is you're going to have to read this next week. This is actual testimony from Patience Kershaw. And I want to read you this one section right here. All my sisters have been hurriers, but 3 went to the mill. Alice went because her legs swelled from hurrying in cold water when she was hot. And she never goes to school.